Hey everybody, it's good to see you. I hope you're doing great today. This is Dr. Flight, and this video is part of a series of videos dealing with marketing research, and we're specifically going to look at something called primary research. So primary research or primary data deals with or is data that you collect. You go out and gather information specifically for a project that you have. So in other words, this is data that would be new data, data that never existed before, that you go out, you create an instrument to collect the data, and then you execute the data collection, and now you have a data set never existed before. It's designed and its implementation is just specifically for the research that you're currently involved with. There are all kinds of ways to collect this type of data, but remember, the object is to solve a problem that the client has, and this data is designed specifically to collect variables and data on variables that will answer that problem. So you may think of lots of different examples, especially from a marketing perspective. Maybe we're doing some segmentation. Maybe we're trying to decide on a product. Maybe we're trying to understand a consumer's decision-making process specifically for my product. You might want to look at shifts or changes or trends that have taken place, and you want to measure those. And so those are all like current issues that you might be facing, might represent good examples of this type of data that you're going to need to collect data for. Okay, some different methods. There's one method called observation. We also have a couple others that would give us this qualitative data. But in observation studies, we just watch, we look, we observe, as you can imagine, right? So there's different ways we can do this. We can do this mechanically, or we can do this with a human, where the human is the researcher, and we're literally watching others or watching the behavior that we want to study, and we record what we see. A mechanical form of observation would be if we used like a video camera or we use some type of a tracker that helped mechanically measure the behavior that's taking place. So a mechanical device is used. We could do the observation where we are hidden and the respondent doesn't know that they're being observed. This is important if we think that the respondent will change their behavior as a result of being observed. There are some safety protocols we have to put into place and make sure that we're not violating any privacy issues, obviously, or laws or anything. We don't want to do any of that. But there are certain behaviors where if we have a video camera and the person doesn't know their actions being recorded, especially if it's in a public place. If someone's in a public place, we have a camera up, they behave the way they would because they don't know they're being observed, and then we can record it. Otherwise, we might want to undisguise. So in other words, be there where the respondent knows that we're watching their behavior. So for instance, if we ask a person if we could track what websites they go to and put a tracking cookie on their server or on their browser, we might ask their permission to do that, and they would be perfectly fine with that. And so they allow us to do that, and then we track their behavior through a mechanical device, and that would be undisguised because they know that we're doing it. And so different observation methods, though, are available to us. Again, this is a way we can collect primary data. We also do focus groups. We can do interviews as well. So when we do an interview, it's typically one-on-one. They're usually, 45 minutes to an hour. We have a script that we use where we ask specific questions, but we want to have a conversation. That's our goal. And it's, again, a one-on-one situation. We do a focus group. We're typically look for a group of consumers who behave in some similar way. Maybe it's a market segment group, and then we're asking them questions, and we expect a lot of sort of communication between the group members. In both cases, we have either an interviewer or a moderator who conducts these, and both of these would yield, again, what we call unstructured data, where we have lots of verbal responses. Okay, and again, this is like we have a specific topic, right? So we're collecting primary data that will answer the specific topic. So whatever those interview questions are, or those focus group kind of questions, they deal specifically with the topic at hand. So they're very focused on solving the problem, and they're not generic in nature. Another thing that we can do, of course, is do survey research. And this is popular, where we develop a set of questions, we let people answer those questions in a survey, and then we gather that data. And again, the questions that we ask are going to be very directed to the problem that we're trying to solve. It's going to be very specific to the problem at hand. That'll be the goal for that. And therefore, that's why we need primary research or primary data to be able to do this. When we use the term structured data, it means that the data has specific answers that we know are going to be the result. So somebody answers a survey question, they're given a set of options in which to respond, and they choose one that best represents their answer, and we analyze it with statistics. Kind of go from there, right? Key, again, is that all this data that's being collected is new data, and it's data that's used specifically for the problem that we're trying to solve. Okay, so lots goes into designing survey questions. There are going to be a couple slides here, and again, I encourage you to pause, study these. So when we ask survey questions and we design them, we want to make sure that they're clear, concise, they're at a reading level that is low, so there's not a lot of ambiguity. We don't use big words, we don't use double negatives, we don't try to create complexity in these questions. We want them as simple to understand as possible. We want to avoid asking questions that would be in a highly sensitive or personal. People tend to lie or skip or not fully tell us the truth, on questions like that. And we don't want to ask questions that could be answered in multiple ways. So there's an example down here. Do you like to shop for clothing and food? Well, I'm really asking you two questions at once, and you might like to shop for food, but you might not like to shop for clothing. So how would you answer that? What we would really want to do is split that into two questions, ask them separately, and get a different response for both. So those are some basic things. Some other basic things is we don't want to lead or have language in our questions that's overly pushy or suggestive, I guess. Bad question here. BMW is the safest car on the road, right? Well, that presumes that it is, and it kind of leads the respondent into that direction. And so the data is going to be overstated and not really true, because a lot of the respondents will be like, oh yeah, I guess it is. Whether it is or not, they're not going to necessarily tell you what their true intentions are, because they're being led in the direction that the researcher wants to lead them in. There are other issues and questions. Avoiding one-sided questions that present only your point of view is another suggestive or leading question approach that you could look at as well. So again, pause this, make sure you understand what these are about. We're not going to go too deep into this, but designing the questions, designing a questionnaire and a research piece takes a good amount of effort. It takes a lot of practice. You have to write the questions, you have to pilot test the questions to make sure they're working correctly. You have to assess those questions, make sure that they're what you want. They answer your problem, and then go from there. Okay, so those are some questions. The last thing that we'll kind of think about or look at specifically when it comes to this whole idea of designing primary research may involve some type of an experiment. Remember, causal research is a type of research where we look at causes and effects. We look at what is happening if I change one variable, how will that impact other variables? If I increase advertising, how much impact will that have on sales, for instance? That's a good cause effect type thing that we look at quite a bit. In advertising, we actually call that something called promotional or advertising lift. That's a term we use. What would be the lift? It's actually kind of a measure or a percentage of improved performance as a result of this new advertisement that we're going to run. So that could be done or tested in an experiment where we have a control and then we have our test ad and we kind of run both and we see what the difference is between the two. And maybe our test ad outperforms the control, and that's what we want to see. So here's an example. Just doing that, we have an advertisement here for a bike. And what'll happen a lot in advertising is there might be 4 or 5 different versions of the ad. And what we'll do is we'll take those versions and we'll ask people, kind of their opinion of it. Maybe we'll put a few out there, and we'll measure the results, to see which ones work best, which ones have the best pull, which ones have the best lift, right? So doing an experiment is certainly, again, you can see how this is clearly primary data. We're only doing the experiment for the purpose of the research, and the data doesn't exist ahead of time. So it's clearly primary data. It's a good example of when it's appropriate to do that. Okay, so advantages then of primary data is it's data that's collected specifically to solve a problem. So, you writing the questions, you're doing the analysis, you're doing the interviews, whatever it is, your method is, you're doing it specifically to solve the problem. And that's really good for validity and for actually answering the problem that you have. Challenge is, anytime you collect data on your own, there are some research challenges sometimes in doing the data collection correctly, but also it's expensive. It's like you have to get a sample, you have to pay the sample, it's timely, you have to pay the researcher to do it. So there's a big expense and there's a bit of an expertise learning curve that has to happen here. It's not something that a novice would want to do. You want to hire somebody who knows what they're doing to do it if you want it done well. Okay, so as we wrap up here, be able to know what primary data is, the different types of quantitative and qualitative research that we do. Be sure to explain or understand when we're writing surveys. We have challenges when we write questions, and we want to make sure that our questions are as good as they possibly can be. So think about some of the pitfalls that are associated with those. Finally, think about what an experiment might be, and then also the advantages and disadvantages of primary research. And what you really want to do is compare it to secondary research. So put secondary and primary research together. What are the pros and cons of each of those? Okay, otherwise you're good to go. You've learned a lot, and let me know if you have any questions, but keep up the great work. Thanks.